spoke about self-pollination and cross-pollination. Kevin, you were already aware of autogamy and 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐤, right? So both are called as self-pollination because it happens in the same plant. Though the flowers are different, even if the flowers are different, it is happening in the different flowers of the same plant. So both are under self-pollination, whereas cross-pollination happens between two different plants altogether, right? So xenogamy will be cross-pollination. Is that clear? So you have two types of pollination, self and cross. Okay. Now, autogamy, like I said, self-pollination, it will take place on the same flower, and transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma happens on the same flower itself. So in this case, what happens? It basically, the flower has to be a bisexual flower where the female and the male parts both are within the same flower. Only then can the self-pollination occur within that same flower, correct? So autogamy can happen in such flowers requires synchrony. What does that mean? That means the pollen release and stigma receptivity should occur at the same time. In the sense that, let us say the pollen grains are released, but the stigma right now is not accepting the pollen grain. So what is going to happen? These pollen grains are going to get wasted, correct? So there has to be a sync between the pollen grain release and the stigma. In the sense, when the pollen grains are released, the stigma should be receptive to accept the pollen grains. Okay. So a lot of times what happens is maybe due to some environmental conditions or the weather or something like that, it can happen that though pollen grains are released, the stigma is not ready to accept. Or it is also possible that the stigma is ready, but the pollen grains do not get released. Okay. So there has to be a synchronous method that has to be followed over here, and only both are simultaneously active can autogamy occur. Okay, and now you have plants which can produce two types of flowers. So one is chasmogamous flowers, and then you have 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴 flowers. The chasmogamous flowers have exposed anthers and stigma, in the sense they are completely open. So if the flowers are open like this, the anther and the stigma both are exposed to the environment. So a lot of times what will happen to such flowers is, apart from autogamy, you can have cross-pollination also happening, right? So let us say some wind-pollinated pollen grains come and it will stick on the stigma, right? So these are chasmogamous flowers. 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴 flowers are those that do not open at all. You have the anther and the stigma within them, they are closed. So the only way of pollination in 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴 flowers is through autogamy. Okay, because they don't open, there is no chance of the other external factors bringing in pollen grain to the stigma. Is this clear, Kevin? You have chasmogamous and 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴 flowers, two types of flowers. Okay, please remember this. Okay, so these are some of the flowers which you will see, chasmogamous flowers, okay, or autogamy. Examples of flowers undergoing autogamy, you have Viola, oxalis, and you have Commelina. Okay, so this is what a chasmogamous and a 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴 flower looks like. As you can see, chasmogamous flower, it's completely open, right? Whereas the 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴 flowers, can you see these white colored ball-like structures? That's nothing but the flowers which are closed. Then we go on to 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐴, which is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of another flower, but of the same plant. Okay, which is why it is again self-pollination only. So genetically similar to autogamy, as pollen grains come from the same plant, correct? So genetically, they're going to be similar. Why? Because everything is happening within the same plant. Now, xenogamy is cross-pollination, where you have the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of another plant. Now, remember another plant, but Suvita, do you remember what I told you here? It is of another plant, but
it's of the same species.
Yes, but it is of the same species. So which means I can have, let us say, sunflower plant 1, sunflower plant 2, completely different plants, not joint at all. But remember, they are both sunflowers. Okay, so they could be put in different fields or different pots or whatever it is, but both are of the same species. So xenogamy is transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of another plant, of the same species. You have to mention that, please. Then we saw agents of pollination, wherein we have seen two agents, abiotic and biotic. Abiotic is non-living, biotic is living. Remember that majority of the plants use biotic agents. Under abiotic, you have wind and water. Now, in pollination by wind and water, it is a chance factor. Hence, to compensate for this, flowers produce large amounts of pollen. Isn't that right? So, sometimes the whatever pollen grains are released into the wind and the wind carries them, most of them may fall onto the ground. Some may not even reach where it's supposed to reach. Okay, similar thing with water. The water carries it, but it may not actually go and fall on a stigma, right? So it's a chance factor. So what is done to compensate for this chance or this loss of the pollen grains is that the flower is going to produce lots and lots of pollen grain. Okay, so that even if majority of these are wasted, at least some of these should go and stick on the stigma. Is that clear? Then you have wind pollination, where pollen grains must be light and non-sticky to be transported in wind currents. Light because if it's too heavy, it may just, the moment it is released, it may just fall off to the ground, right? And we don't want that. Now, flowers pollinated by wind usually possess well-exposed stamens for easy dispersal of pollen grains in the wind and large feathery stigma to trap airborne pollen grains. Is that clear? So the flowers which are pollinated by wind, what is going to happen? The stamens are going to be well exposed, okay, so that the pollen grains can be released into the air. Similarly, the stigma are going to be really feathery or hairy so that any pollen grains in the air can easily get trapped. Okay, so these are some features of flowers pollinated by wind. Okay, that I want you to remember. Well exposed stamens and large feathery stigma. Then wind-pollinated flowers often have a single ovule in each ovary and numerous flowers packed in an inflorescence. So what does this mean? You remember the ovules? We had seen the ovule structure, right? Those white, small white kind of structures. There were multiple, but wind-pollinated ones will have just one. Okay, they'll just have a single ovule. Okay, and numerous flowers packed in an inflorescence, in the sense when flowers are really small or some, tiny flowers, they come together and they form a bunch of flowers. That is called as an inflorescence. So here in example, can you see this corn cob, which is on the right hand side? Okay, the tassels as in this hairy long structure that you see are nothing but stigma and style, which wave in the air to trap pollen grains. Okay, so that's for wind pollination. Any pollen grains that passes along here can be trapped in this tassels or the hairy structure or feathery structure of the corn. Now, pollination by water is rare and it is limited to only 30 genera. So these two plants here, Vallisneria and Hydrilla, are examples of plants which are pollinated by water. Okay, please remember these examples. You can get these in, any kind of objective kind of questions, right? So Vallisneria and Hydrilla are water pollinated plants. Now, not all aquatic plants use water for pollination. In majority of aquatic plants, such as water hyacinth, which is the first one here, purple flowers, and water lily, the white one here, the flowers emerge above water level and then they will be pollinated by insects or wind. Can you see? It is not, the flower is above the water level, whereas the remaining part or the stalk and the stem and everything is under the water level. So what is actually happening? The flowers here, though they are aquatic, they come out of the water, they come on the surface of the water, and then they get pollinated. Okay, so they can be pollinated by wind or by insects. Okay, so here you have to remember these two examples, water hyacinth and water lily. Examples for what? Water, these are examples for aquatic plants which are not pollinated by water. Okay. So remember this one, I spoke about Vallisneria, which is an aquatic plant, right? So what happens in Vallisneria is the female flower, okay, it reaches the surface of the water by the long stalk. Okay, so as you can see over here, this thing right here, okay, let us say this is the surface of the water. So this that you can see over here, this is the surface of the water. Okay, now what happens in Vallisneria is this, it has a long stalk. Okay, this entire thing is the stalk of the flower. Okay, so this will be under the water, whereas the flower over here will reach above the surface of the flower. Okay, this is the female flower, by the way. Now the male flower, which has the pollen grains, okay, that's going to be inside the water itself. Okay, can you see the male flower here? So in this case, you have the male and the female flowers separately. So is this a unisexual flower or is this a bisexual flower? What do you think? Vallisneria. Anybody? Yeah. So male flower is separate, female flower is separate. What do you think? Is it bisexual? Is it unisexual?
Separate as in they're in another plant.
No, no. It is, so you can have the same flower, but one is going to have just the male parts, just the male reproductive organs, and the other flower is going to have just the female reproductive organs. Not in the, like, just like how we saw in autogamy, you need one flower with both the reproductive parts in the same flower, right? For autogamy to happen. Correct. Here you're going to have the female flower separate, you're going to have the male flower separate. It's the same flower. Okay, but it's going to be different in its reproductive organ. So if that happens, is it a unisexual flower or is it a bisexual flower? What do you think?
Unisexual?
Yeah, it is a unisexual flower because the parts are different, right? So there's just one part that you just have one reproductive organ in each of the flowers. If you had both together, it would be bisexual. Okay, so can you see in this? So this is the female flower where the flower is on the surface. You have the male flower which is submerged in the water. So now, as you can see here, male flowers or the pollen grains are released onto the surface of the water. So though the male flower is inside the water, all these pollen grains will be released and it will come on top. That is, it will come to the surface of the flower where it will meet the stigma of the female flower. And that is how pollination takes place in Vallisneria. Now, you may say that the pollen grains which are within the water, it just gets released. Now, how does it reach on top to the surface? This happens through the water currents. Okay, so as the water is flowing, it will push the pollen grains towards the surface. So that is why it says here they are carried passively by water currents. Some of them reach the female flower and stigma. Correct. So again, not necessary that, let's say 10 pollen grains are released and all 10 reach the stigma. Some may just flow off to some other direction and it may never reach the stigma, right? But some of them will reach the stigma where pollination will occur. Is this clear? This is in Vallisneria, which is an aquatic plant. Please remember this. You should know how pollination occurs in Vallisneria. Okay, in another group of water pollinated plants, such as sea grasses, this image here is of sea grass. Okay, female flowers remain submerged in water and pollen grains are released inside the water. Pollen grains in such cases are long ribbon-like. Okay, so what we've seen earlier in Vallisneria is that the female flowers, they come out of the water, right? Whereas in sea grasses, what happens is the female flower is within the water, the male flower is also within the water. So in this case, what will happen? The pollen grains will be released and there itself it will reach the flower, okay? Because the female flower is also within the water. All right, but just remember this peculiar shape of the pollen grains in such cases. It is long and it is ribbon-like. Okay, ribbon-like in the sense it is somewhat flat kind of pollen grains. That is so that it can easily move in the water. Okay, so please remember this. Then you have water pollinated Yeah, so the water pollinated species of flowers, okay, remember that their pollen grains are covered by mucilaginous sheath. Do you all know what this word means? Mucilaginous or mucilage? Any idea? So mucilaginous sheath is basically like a viscous kind of material. Viscous in the sense it's more like, a sticky jelly-like substance. Okay, sticky jelly-like substance. So this kind of a substance will form a sheath around these pollen grains. Okay, one thing is that it's for protection. Other thing is for it to disperse easily. All right. Now, I have a question for y'all. Both wind and water pollinated flowers are not very colorful and do not produce nectar. What would be the reason for this? Any idea? Now we've just seen a couple of plants, right? They just green and they look really dull and nothing very fancy about them, not colorful, not fragrant, whatever it is. So what do you think could be the reason for this?
Because in water, there's no insects to.
Okay, in water there's no insect. So Vita, anything else?
No.
So Kevin, if in water there's no insect, what then? Yeah, there are no insects in water. Then
It's just that because like they don't have to, call out the insects. So basically that's
yeah,
only the reason.
yes. So main reason is they are not colorful because definitely there are no insects in water. So eventually they don't have to actually attract the insects, right? They don't have to call out to the insects or something. So if you have like these colorful, bright, pigmented flowers having a lot of nectar, the insects get attracted to such flowers and they come and they sit on these flowers. In water, definitely because there are no insects, you don't have to do you don't require this kind of pigmented flowers or nectar or an essence or fragrance or whatever it is. Okay, so that's the main reason for these water and wind pollinated flowers not being colorful or not producing nectar.